Hey there, movie buffs, and welcome back to another awesome episode of Double Feature with your host, Pedro. As you can tell, new setting temporarily for this episode. And so what's this episode's main topic, you may ask? Well, today we're diving into the exciting world of sequels.
Show me the money.
If you take a quick glance at the highest grossing movies of all time, not adjusted to inflation, you'll find a staggering number of sequels, most of which were released in the last 10 to 15 years. Hollywood's reason for relying on sequels is twofold. First, there's the massive financial upside in revisiting properties that audiences already know and are familiar with, and then there's the role of sequels as a way to de-risk the highly competitive content market in which the studios operate.
Talking mucho dinero here. And probably some American money, too.
There's no better proof of the continuous and everlasting appeal of sequels than last year's juggernaut, Avatar: The Way of the Water. The James Cameron directed sequel made $2.3 billion, bringing the franchise to a total of $7.5 billion in worldwide revenues. Not bad for a series that started in the late 90s featuring blue people that live underwater. In order to remain fresh, relevant, and competitive, sequels have evolved during the last decade or so. Rather than just continuing the story, new chapters have started to tap into other success drivers, most notably the nostalgia effect and the franchise-building potential of an entry. As a result, sequels started to come in different shapes and sizes. You've got your standalone sequel, your retcon sequel that ignores the previous sequels, your legacy sequel, and a just plain bad sequel. But sequels weren't always at the front and center of every major studio's content strategy. Sure, you had your Universal horror movies released between the 1930s and the 1950s, and the serials of the 1940s, and even the James Bond movies of the early 1960s, but they pretty much operated as standalone entries that belonged to a series. Movie sequels as we know them have their origin in the 1970s, when The Godfather Part 2 became a box office smash and the first sequel to officially win Best Picture at the Academy Awards. Studios took notice, and soon enough Hollywood had found a new cash cow. Take a critical and commercially successful movie, usually a Best Picture Academy Award nominee or winner, and produce another entry that takes the story a step further, even if there is no need, interest, or way you can actually develop that plot. At the time, sequels weren't expected to surpass their predecessors in terms of quality and revenue. Instead, they were seen as an opportunity to squeeze a bit more money out of a successful property. And while some of these sequels to bona fide hits went on to become critical and/or commercial successes, the large majority were derided by critics and ignored by audiences, showing that the formula wasn't foolproof. Today, I'll be talking about two forgotten sequels that some viewers don't even know they exist. Follow-ups to iconic, critical and commercial hits that failed to replicate the impact and commercial success of their predecessors. Two titles boasting a dark and serious tone with a focus on crime and corruption. Two movies where charismatic protagonists navigate new and complex cases. Two underrated entries that share a singular flaw: the absence of the greatest method actor who ever lived, Sir Steve Guttenberg.
French Connection 2, the only film that could follow the French Connection. When Gene Hackman created the character of Detective Popeye Doyle in The French Connection, his performance won the Academy Award for Best Actor. Now, 20th Century Fox presents Gene Hackman in a new look at the legend of Popeye Doyle and the pursuit of The French Connection.
1971's The French Connection is a timeless classic. Directed by the recently departed William Friedkin, the first real gritty and realistic police drama introduced us to the tough New York City cop Jimmy Popeye Doyle, played by the iconic Gene Hackman. With its unique take on the NYPD narcotics squad, amazing car chases, and stellar performances, Friedkin's film was elevated to the pantheon of filmmaking excellence. Plans to develop a sequel were announced in 1972, but it would take more than 3 years before French Connection 2 was seen by audiences around the world. Helmed by John Frankenheimer, the movie follows Gene Hackman as Detective Doyle, as he travels through Marseille to track down the drug lord he was unable to capture in the first film, Alain Charnier, played by Fernando Rey. Doyle's investigation is hampered by a lack of cooperation from the French police and the complexity of local law enforcement. As Doyle delves deeper into the case, he finds himself increasingly isolated and desperate. Frankenheimer and screenwriters Robert and Laurie Dillon took a chance and created a sequel that's miles apart from the original. They ditched the frantic pace of the original for a slow burner, and transporting Doyle from a comfortable role as a prince of the city to a new territory, a place where his amoral, hot-tempered persona doesn't belong, and the language barrier turns him into a mere spectator as opposed to a key player. Still, Doyle is a man on a mission, and nothing will stop him from catching the heroin Tsar. Now, I'm not claiming that the French Connection 2 is superior to the original, but I think that the movie can and should be praised for delivering a story that really stands out. The 1971 original had as primary focus the investigation and pursuit of a drug lord, whereas the sequel delves into Doyle's character, namely the psychological toll that the case takes on him, which really fleshes out the character in ways that the original didn't have time to do. I think the change of setting is also a welcome addition. French Connection 2 features a stunning cinematography that captures the gritty realism of the city of Marseille, and the movie makes an excellent use of the location shooting and creative camera angles to really create a tense and immersive atmosphere. And though the sequel could never surpass the car chase directed by William Friedkin, it's safe to say that Frankenheimer managed to do a great job with both the high-speed chase through the city's streets and the harrowing confrontation in the heroin processing plant. It's easy to understand how this sequel is overshadowed by the original. Friedkin's movie was a colossal box office hit, won tons of accolades, and created the blueprint that would be followed by all police-centered movies on both the big and small screen. That is until Michael Mann's Miami Vice premiered in 1984. But fans of the original movie and general action movie enthusiasts should not miss out on this one. Despite the ties to its predecessor, French Connection 2 can still be enjoyed as a standalone movie. Frankenheimer would later revisit the French setting and fast-paced action chases in 1998's Ronin, another title you should definitely check out if you have the time. Summing it up, if you're up to see the legendary Gene Hackman deliver a masterclass in acting, if you're keen on seeing an action movie that really incorporates some good, dark humor elements, and if you're on board with an effective sequel that not only raises the stakes, but takes time to build the original characters into full-fledged three-dimensional characters, 1975's French Connection 2 is your go-to choice.
The war was good for LA. Brought in money, opportunity, and more than a little greed.
Put the weasel in jail. Nothing else matters. Nothing else in the world.
How about $5 or $6 million bucks?
Could I make a phone call?
Please.
Now the war's over, and people come here because they think the money's easy and the women are easier. That's a combination that's good for business.
Roman Polanski's seminal film from 1974 captured the essence of the new Hollywood movement. A bold and brilliant neo-noir that catapulted Jack Nicholson and Faye Dunaway into superstardom. Chinatown was a critical and commercial success, earning Robert Towne an Oscar for Best Original Screenplay and keeping him busy throughout the rest of the decade. Yet few of those who have watched and praised the original have caught up with the sequel, The Two Jakes. The sequel to Chinatown was released 16 years later. Set in LA in 1948, A decade after the events of the original movie, the movie follows private investigator Jake Geitz, played by Jack Nicholson, who's hired by a wealthy land developer, Jake Berman, played by Harvey Keitel, to investigate his wife's infidelity. However, the case becomes more complicated when Berman is accused of murdering his business partner. As Geitz delves deeper into the case, he discovers a web of corruption and deceit involving many prominent figures in the oil industry, leading him to confront some of the most powerful and dangerous people in the city. Along the way, he also has to confront his own demons and reckon with his complicated relationships with the women in his life. Safe to say that the two Jakes had a troubled production story. Robert Towne decided to revisit Jake Geitz's world in early 1980s. And by 1984 he had a finished script, but a chaotic pre-production process prevented an immediate shoot. Producer Robert Evans was dead set on playing the role of Berman, but Towne had his reservations about Evans' acting abilities. After all, Robert Evans was the source material of the documentary The Kid Stays in the Picture. Because of the conflict between Towne and Evans, the movie was then put into a turnaround, and an endless number of studios, directors, and actors were attached to the project. At some point in time, names such as Dennis Hopper, Joe Pesci, Dustin Hoffman, and Harrison Ford were cast in the movie. But finally, in 1989, production started with Jack Nicholson starring and directing the movie. The Two Jakes was a critical and commercial failure. But in this movie buff's opinion, that reputation is unwarranted. And there are several incredible aspects that make The Two Jakes a must-watch. The sequel surpasses the original in terms of cinematography. Vilma Sigmund's sepia cinematography, intended to represent the late 1940s Hollywood, is simply stunning, and his usage of color and light creates a striking visual landscape that enhances the mood and atmosphere of the story. Pace is another area in which the movie excels. Some critics and movie fans alike have argued that Chinatown is a slow-paced and slow-moving film. In The Two Jakes, you have a more tightly paced and action-packed entry. Towne's original was a bit convoluted at times, and the sequel is much more straightforward without losing any nuance or sacrificing subtext. But in my opinion, the movie's biggest highlight is how Jake Geitz was written in a manner that his personal growth mimics Jack Nicholson's very own transition from Chinatown Jack into the grinning, sunglasses-sporting Jack Nicholson that we know and love. The fact is that the character has evolved since we last saw him and blended into the actor's very own essence. The only other example I can think of where there's such a great match between character, plot, and actor is actually Al Pacino and Michael Corleone in The Godfather Part 3, also released in 1990. The Two Jakes script manages to bring Jack Nicholson's way of smiling through deep emotions by portraying Geitz as a World War II veteran, something that also gives the character a greater depth and complexity. The Two Jakes is, well, at least in my opinion, an excellent sequel, even if it does try to distance itself from the original a bit too much. But if you're up for a wonderful world-building exercise, a charismatic and dynamic performance by Jack Nicholson, and a great visual combo between a sunny and optimist California and the dark, shady secrets that linger within in the underworld, you just simply have to watch The Two Jakes. Once again, I'm Pedro from Vinyl and Celluloid, and thanks for watching. If you are interested in finding out my thoughts on other movies, go over to my Letterboxd page where you can find over 300 movie reviews, penned by yours truly. Until next time, keep the reels rolling.